and we are inside Management Studio 2012. Now, one of the first things you may be thinking to yourself, man, this looks a little bit different. It's got a different color scheme. Well, one of the big things is that SQL Server 12 is now in the Visual Studio 2010 shell. Yes, if you weren't aware before, the Management Studio has always been a shell of Visual Studio. Previously, it was the older versions of Visual Studio, but now it's up to Visual Studio 2010. So we're connected to my 2012 instance. We're just going to kind of run down the line and look at some of the new stuff. Now, right off the bat, something very important to note. The lowest server level that the 2012 Management Studio can connect to is 2005. You can't connect to a SQL Server 2000 instance with the 2012 Management Studio. I know, but if anything, this just gives you yet another reason to kill those 2000 servers in your environment. Not that there's anything wrong with 2000. It's a very stable, lovely platform, but I live and die on the bleeding edge because I'm just like that. So let's go down here. So databases, this looks pretty much normal, and we'll get into those. There's a couple of new nodes that you may notice right off the bat. One of the first ones is this always-on high availability node. Now, one of the biggest new features in SQL Server 2012 is always-on availability groups. Now, this virtual machine that I'm on already has one configured, so you can see my availability groups and all the replicas and databases and listeners and whatnot inside of it. Now, if you're not familiar with that, not a problem. Always-on availability groups is an entire other session. I'm just simply showing you that it's available here in the tool. One of the cool things that Management Studio does show you in terms of managing your availability groups, if you were to right-click on Always-on High Availability Group and do a Show Dashboard, we get some really cool insights on the availability groups. It's going to take a minute because it's got to connect to my nodes, but you can see all the availability groups. I just have one set up. So I'm going to click here to drill further into my details of my availability group. And you can see the failover mode, the synchronization state, and it'll take a minute to get the information from the others, but you'll start seeing the information from all the other nodes. Up here, you can actually fail over the availability group to any other node inside the availability group cluster. Excuse me, I can't speak today. And you can see some other information that's really, really nice. All right, I'm going to close that up, and we're going to move further down the line. We've got another new node here, Integration Services Catalogs. Now, I'm going to have to flip back to my local desktop here because I have IS running on that one. But under that node, we have the new Integration Services Catalog. Now, for those of you that don't know, Integration Services no longer runs as a service by itself. It kind of runs with the engine. And now we have what's called Integration Services Catalog. And when you set one up, when you right-click and do Create a Catalog, obviously I can't do it if you only get one catalog, but when you create the catalog, it actually creates a database on your instance called SSISDB. You can't change that name. That's the name by default. But what's kept inside that is you can create projects. So here I've created a new folder. And inside that, you can create projects to deploy your IS packages. You can configure different environments. There's an entire other webinar in our archives that recently happened on what's new in SSIS 2012. I highly suggest you check out that webinar because there's big changes with SSIS. So what you can do there is you can deploy packages together as a project. But inside Management Studio, one of the cool things that you could do is if you right-click, you could do active operations. And if I had packages running or ran, you would see the history and some of the metadata here. Just another side note, one of the cool things about having this as an available database is you can actually query this stuff, so you can build your own reports off the metadata that's collected from your integration services packages. which is pretty nice. Now, we're going to go into management here, and we're going to hit one of my personal favorites, policy-based management. Now, policy-based management itself didn't get much of a facelift. One of the big changes, though, or really some of the only changes, is that they added new facets. And the facets they added are specifically around availability groups. So just a couple new ones there. Always on availability groups under the covers actually uses policy-based management to help configure the health state of the group. So if I drill here to system policies, you see that there's built-in always-on policies here. You don't make these; they're just there by default. So that's that one. Next, actually, I should probably zoom in. So now we have extended events. Now, extended events is something that's really important to learn. So extended events were actually introduced in SQL Server 2008. And I say 2008, not even R2. 2008 they came around. The problem with extended events is that it was T-SQL only, and it's kind of cumbersome. It wasn't really easy. Some of you may be asking yourself, well, what are extended events? Well, one of the tools that is been available to us since 2005 has been the SQL Server Profiler tool. And the Profiler tool, I'm going to launch real quick here. The Profiler tool allows you to do a trace against the SQL Server. Now, this tool, for the most part, hasn't changed. However, the big bit of news here is that traces have now officially been listed as a deprecated feature. Extended events are going to be taking over the trace functionality. Now, why is that? Extended events is actually better performance-wise. Well, let me take that back. It's a little more lightweight than a trace is, but it's much more flexible, much more powerful. Now, before 2012, as I mentioned, they were a little bit harder to set up because you have to do all through T-SQL. Now with the 2012 interface, we have a graphical way of setting up our extended events. So I click here, I see my sessions. You can create a new session through a wizard. So if I launch the new session wizard, it'll actually step you through creating a new extended events session. So to demo, you can tell this thing to start the event session whenever the service starts up. I'm not going to do that for now. We can use a pre-built template, or we could just start from our own.